In this presentation, we'll explore one of the essential components of best practices in teaching, making learning visible. As we go through this presentation, I want you to start by considering the fact that you have about 30 students in your class. How do you ensure that 30 students understand the concepts you teach in your lesson? And how do you know what they're thinking about the new learning? This idea brings us to the concept of visible learning. Visible learning is actually teachers seeing learning through the eyes of students, and students seeing teaching as a key to their learning. What we do in this position is of the utmost importance, and the key ingredients to our teaching is the awareness of our learning intentions or our objective, knowing when a student is successful or our assessment, having sufficient understanding of the student's understanding or formative assessments, and knowing enough about the content to provide meaningful and challenging experiences. And this is our differentiation and engagement. In order to be successful, a teacher needs to know when to experiment and learn from those experiences. We have to know how to monitor and seek and give feedback. And we definitely have to know alternative strategies for students who are not successful the first time around. The more students actually become teachers themselves and the more we become learners, the more successful the outcomes. A significant amount of research has gone into this particular topic. And what was found in 2005 is that 40% of what occurs among students is actually missed by teachers. And 40% of what teachers intend for students to learn, they already know. Teachers assume that teaching is going well because there are certain signs of successful classroom management that we misinterpret as successful learning. A student who is quiet, who takes notes, who completes a handout is seen to be successful when actually that student is just being compliant. Another startling statistic is that 80% of feedback given to students is given by other people than the teacher, and 80% of that feedback is actually incorrect, which brings us back to the idea of students becoming teachers and teachers learning about what students need to know. So if we're not getting the biggest bang for our buck, what can we change? For teachers, we have to start with clear learning intentions. Also, establishing a successful criteria for what success is and making that challenging. Learning a range of learning strategies. Knowing when our students are not progressing, which means we have to be able to see what they understand about the concept. Providing them with feedback, descriptive feedback that gives them ideas about what they're doing right and what they need to do to be better. And then visibly learning ourselves. For students, they need to understand the learning intentions. They need to be challenged by the success criteria. They also need to develop a range of learning strategies. It's not just important that we know these strategies, but that we teach them to our students so that they have a toolbox of their own. They also need to know when they're not progressing and have a set of tools to use to help them get back to the right path. They need to know how to visibly and consistently seek feedback, and they need to know how to teach themselves. John Hattie comes up with a bunch of questions on this very topic. And what he says is that we need to be able to ask ourselves, how do I know if this is working? What can I compare this particular strategy to? When we're considering a lesson, what's the merit and the worth or the influence on this? What's the magnitude of the effect of this particular strategy or this situation? And what evidence will convince us that we're wrong in our thinking? There are a lot of factors that influence student success. And we've probably spent some time in faculty lounges talking about various things that could affect student success. Most of our PDs, we can say, yes, if I change this, that would help. But it doesn't mean that the child is going to be more successful if there are issues at home, or if there's issues with the curriculum, or if there are issues with behavior in the class itself. So what John Hattie did is looked at these different things that can affect a student's success and look at which ones have the biggest impact on that success. And he uses the barometer of effectiveness and gave each of the barometers or each of the zones a particular number to show which had the greater effect. And anything larger than 4/10 was shown to be an area that had a zone of desired effect. Using a piece of paper or whiteboard, I want you to try to rank the order of these areas of importance to student achievement. We have acceleration, feedback, student and teacher relationships, teaching study skills, reading recovery, self-reported grades, formative evaluations of teachers, cooperative learning, homework, individualized instruction, ability grouping, open versus traditional spaces, which are those open classrooms from the late 70s and early 80s, mobility, or retention. Here's the correct order. Notice that the area that had the largest impact on student success was self-reported grades. Students thinking about what they've learned and evaluating themselves. Why would that have the biggest impact on student success? Think about what has to go into a student being able to self-report grades. They have to be able to understand what they learn, understand what the success criteria is, determine whether or not they've actually learned those things or established mastery of a concept, and then be able to discuss their areas of strength and weakness. How much would you really need to know in order to do that successful? It's pretty obvious why that would have a big impact on student success. Here are the ES scores for those factors. Now, some of the areas that had the least impact are here. And these are some of the areas that we talk about in our faculty rooms at times. This child doesn't get enough to eat at home. Sometimes girls do better in this or boys do better in this. We look at different curricular experiences or different things that have changed, ability grouping. They shouldn't be in this class. And they actually don't have as big of an impact as we might think. But things that do are here. Student-teacher relationship, metacognitive strategies, creativity programs with self-verbalization, self-questioning, bringing it back to the student being able to really talk about and do things on their own. Here are the biggest winners or the ones that have the biggest influence. Again, self-reported grades at the top here. So we can't continue to make decisions based on luck. We have to start to implement some strategies in our classrooms that get students to be metacognitive about their own learning, get them to be the teachers, and come up with strategies that they can use when they're falling behind. But we also have to be able to see what they're thinking, which means we can't continue to do handouts, have them work in groups, and then go over the answers at the end of class and have them turn in an exit ticket where we don't know that they have any misconceptions until they're walking out of the door. Remember, visible learning's key message: when teachers see learning through the eyes of the students, and when students see themselves as their own teachers. Now here's some strategies and some suggestions for making learning visible, and we'll go through each of these in detail. The first, the placemat strategy. You can use this in a group. You can access prior knowledge, you can review a concept. You start off by posting a set of questions and having students individually respond along the parameter of this graphic organizer. You can have them create the graphic organizer on a large piece of chart paper, or you can do it before the class starts. Students individually record the answer to the questions along the parameter as you walk around to see exactly what they're thinking about the learning. After a specified time period, you have students work it as a group to summarize what they've thought, to combine some of the thoughts, or maybe even answer some of the misconceptions that some students have. Again, as you're walking around, you can hear what students are thinking about the learning. When could you use this in your class? Think about the next lesson you have planned and decide where a placemat strategy might work. The KWL web is a new take on the KWL chart. You take chart paper and have students create a web of what they already know about a particular subject. The subject goes in the middle, they write what they know in the web around it. You can do it individually or you can do it as a class. Breaking the students into groups, you give them a different color from what they've used for the web and have the students come up with questions about the topic or subtopics that they've created on the web. They are to draw lines and boxes connecting the questions that they have with the topic or subtopic. Once they finish that portion, which is the W portion of the KWL web, you have them read on that particular subject. After they finish reading, and you can give them a look for of answering the questions that they've come up with as a group or coming up with vocabulary that they're learning, but you give them another color to go back to their group and they are to answer the questions that they came up with. Here's an example of what one could look like. In a professional development, the participants wrote everything they knew about hummingbirds in red. They came up with questions in green, and after the reading, they came up with the answers to the questions or new information that they learned about the hummingbirds in blue. It's a great way for you to see if there are any misconceptions or if there are still questions about the topic that haven't been answered. And when could you use this in your classroom? The next example is a zine. In the world of publishing, it's a short magazine. It's self-published and creative circulation. In the classroom, it's a foldable that can be used to help students define certain concepts on any given topic. Here are the directions for it. It takes about 5 minutes to get the class to create a zine. You can have them tear the center when you get to that portion, or you can pass out scissors. Here's an example of one in an art class where the students have defined and provided examples of the elements of art. It gives the teacher a great way to see if they really understand those concepts, if they really understand the topic, or if there are any misconceptions. Tic-tac-toe is another strategy that can be used to place vocabulary or important terms on a spectrum and allow students to understand if they notice the connections between those terms or vocabulary words from a unit. You can write the vocabulary words on index cards and give groups of students a set. Have the students shuffle the cards and place 9 cards in 3x3 format. Ask the groups to construct 8 sentences, including 3 words straight across, 3 words down, or diagonally, and then have the groups share their sentences and discuss important connections or misconnections between words and concepts. It's an easy way for you to see if the students understand how those terms relate to each other or if they have a problem with any particular words, and a great opportunity for you to clarify. Here's an example from a social studies classroom. Lastly is the top 10 list, stolen from Jay Leno's Tonight Show. You can have students come up with the top 10 lists of the most important facts about any concept or subject that you've taught. You have the students place the facts in order from least important or impactful to the greatest. You encourage them to include humor as a way to increase engagement. What you can do is see if students really understand the key concepts of whatever area that they're studying. If they have any misconceptions, an opportunity for you to work one-on-one or with groups. You can have students differentiated in groups and have them create top 10 lists for specific subjects, things that you've given them more attention on, or things that they might need to have more reading on based on their top 10 list results. I want you to think about all the ways that you can learn or all the ways that you can apply this strategy in your classroom. Once you are finished with the PowerPoint, you can go back and look over it at any point. Go to the PB Works website, which is bcpsamsuniversity.pbworks.com, and go over to the online course offerings, which you can find here. For this module, there's a quick start quiz. Just click here and find the quiz on Making Learning Visible. Once you've completed that quiz, go ahead and request credit. using the request credit form.